Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you all for joining me on a Monday afternoon. I'm basically going to talk to you about, instead of the MIT web app or app inventor, I'm going to talk to you a bit about app development or web app development. And we're going to go through a scenario of creating a very, very rudimentary or basic application. Okay, so let me just give you a quick introduction about myself. My name is Yashin Abed. I've been in IT or the IT industry for over 20 years. My qualifications I've done BCom Informatics, a BSc Honors in Digital Technology, and an Executive MBA with INSEAD. And fundamentally, I focus primarily around digital transformation and specifically looking at the third world economies and emerging economies to actually look at how we can utilize digital technology to leapfrog into what's called the digital economy. Now, I'm going to assume you have some sort of IT knowledge, but either way, this will be good enough for those with basic understanding too. So I want you to first imagine, I do apologize, I lost a presentation of mine, but I'm going to talk through it and hopefully that will suffice before we actually build this app itself. But fundamentally, what we're going to do is we do understand that when you look at the application world, there's two main areas, and they call this the front end and the back end. And when you look at the front end, the best way to describe the front end is for me to, if I had to create an application, I need to design it. And if I took a piece of paper and I drew what it should look like, that would be the front end. I would design exactly how it should look, feel, the color combination, the font size, the size of each box, all of those lovely things. And I do that on the front end. Now, when we talk about it in terms of the back end, now when I click on a button, it needs to do something. And generally, that's where back end processing happens. And that can be either on the server, on a user's machine, on a server, or even on a database. So typical example is, let's say I want to log in and I entered my username and my password and I click on login. Well, now that application will take my username and password, go in to the server, and then actually use a bit of code to access the database and saying, okay, does this user exist? Find him. Is this password correct? Yes, return, then allow him to proceed to the next level. And all of that logic will reside on what's called the backend. So there are many, many different languages. And the idea is for you to as well realize that it is not, you don't need to think about every single language that you want to learn. There are hundreds of languages out there, and for you to learn all of them actually will be irrelevant. So generally, when we're talking about it, for the purposes of this item, we're saying, look, there's a PC, there's a tablet, and there's a phone. And for us to access an application, we've got two options. The one is we can either use a web application, which basically is accessed through our browsers. So if I had my laptop, I'd use Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, or Microsoft Edge. If I had my if I had my Apple iPhone or tablet, I'd be using Safari. And if I use Android, I'd basically be using either Google or Safari, Samsung Internet, and all of the different browsers they have. So when you use a web application, there's an inbuilt application either on your desktop or laptop, or on your phone or on your tablet. They will have the application already pre-installed. Now, when you have an app that you're downloading from a store, this would be an Android store or the iOS store, the Apple store. That basically allows you to install the app on your local machine, which means in some cases you can run the app offline when you're not connected to the internet, and you can also run it when you are connected to the internet. And that's the advantage of having an app downloaded, is that it has the ability to run on your local phone's processor or tablet's processor, or even your laptop's processor or Mac. And then finally, if you have a web item, it basically has the advantage to say, look, first it needs internet, but the advantage is that you are not determined or you're not required to use the existing application infrastructure. So you don't need the App Store. You don't need to be paying app rights to load it on the App Store, download it. Your users can access it on any devices they want to. And in that vein, that is why we're focusing on web app development, because fundamentally you can design a web app in such a way that it will actually scale to the type of device you're using. And that, for example, if you're using a laptop, it will look fine on a laptop. If you're using your phone, it will actually scale according to your phone if you design it correctly. So that is in essence what we'll be going through. I'd also like to talk through the type of languages that we'll be using. So the first thing is we're going to be using an application called, to actually do all of the coding, the application is called Visual Studio Code. And I'm just going to share that screen with you. Sorry, let me just go back here. Okay, let me just stop the share for a second. Share screen. I'm just getting into the actual screen that we want to go into, which is, okay, so when we look at this, this is the code.visualstudio.com. You can download it. This is a free application that you'll install on your laptop or your Mac. And this allows you to actually type in the code that we're going to create. And the main purpose of this is to say, okay, you know what? It actually formats it, finds errors much better than us using notebook or text file directly. And we'll be using this application to create two main files. The first file would be what's called an HTML file, and the second one will be a CSS file. Now, when you do web app development, the two main languages you're using there is HTML5 and CSS3. Now, let's think about that for a second, right? You might have heard of other things like WordPress and Wix or Joomla and the like. And all those applications are, or those capabilities are, is that basically they're compilers that says, look, we don't like to type code specifically, so we're giving the user an ability to drag and drop and visually create the item. And the application itself, like Wikipedia, will create the code, which will be either CSS, HTML, and the server-side coding, which is PHP. So those are examples of code that gets used. We are going to be using three main aspects around coding, which is the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Why JavaScript? Is because we're going to create a bit of, like I said, back-end code, but we're going to use JavaScript on our front-end machines. So typically when you got your laptop, your browsers can interpret CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. Now, the problem with that is that if you are a user that disables JavaScript, then all of that functionality is gone. And that's why most of the functionality in future, you should always think about developing on the back end, on the server side. And once you actually develop it on the server side, then it prevents the user from actually disabling your code per se. So now, unfortunately, I know a lot of you have not downloaded that code, but it doesn't matter. You can do this on a text file as well and just save it as index.html and associated items. But so we want to create a small time application. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through this bit by bit. Unfortunately, you don't have Visual Studio Code, but I will open my version of it and I'll walk you through it bit by bit. Okay, I'll be sharing that with you very shortly. Okay, so this is Visual Studio Code. And first thing is we're going to do is we're going to go to our Internet Explorer. And let's say on our desktop, we're just going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it web app. Okay, I've created a folder on my desktop called web app, and now we're going to open that folder. Open folder, and let's see, on my desktop, there's it, web app. And now we're in the web app folder, which has nothing in it, by the way. So now on this web app folder, we're basically going to create our first file. This file is called index.html, as I told you. So this would be like you're creating a TXT file, and you would just use it to say, I want, and from Notepad, call it, make it a blank file, but name it index.html. Now, what we're going to do here is we are going to, the advantage of using this application now is it allows me to autocomplete things. So I'll type things like HTML5, and it will autocomplete a nice little structure for me. And as you can see now, this just creates a framework for me to start working in. And I want to make sure that we work through this bit by bit. Fundamentally, this document is the document when you open up a tab, and let's call it my app. And I'll save this. And I'm going to okay, I'm just going to stop sharing again. Okay, so now I'm basically going to go to that file. I'm going to open it up as well, because we're going to have this constantly open. Okay, now let me share this again. Okay, now what you're going to see here is, in essence, the My App application that we created. Okay, now you'll see that it doesn't look very pretty. We don't have an icon. We don't have anything else on it. We don't have any content. But in essence, we have what's called a web. Our browser is now reading an HTML file, and it's got nothing in it. Now, the most important thing I'm going to tell you is you need to know this website. This website is called W3C Schools, and this is free tutorials. It's basically created by the organization that actually manages with the web and the web knowledge for HTML and CSS. And in essence, it goes through everything here. I mean, it's all free content. It is HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, JavaScript, all the different programming from Python, server-side, web building, XML, artificial intelligence. It gives you a ton of tutorials, and it's really, really good. It's something that anyone that's an aspiring developer needs to go through. For the purpose of starting off, I would say start off with 3 things. Number 1, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe PHP, which is a bit outdated, and a database language. And that will complete your entire first bit of end-to-end or full stack development. Now, you'll find out very quickly that once you get to databases and server-side gets a bit more complex, but we're not doing that right now. Okay, so now we're sitting on this blank My App itself, and we want to actually put some information on it. So the first thing is I'm going to download an icon, because this little thing on this side doesn't look very pretty. So let's just find a little icon. Let's just find an icon image. Okay, let's just use this, this download one. We'll save this image exactly where we created our web app, because that becomes our root folder for all web content. So when you start creating it, we created in our desktop, we created web app, and we're going to create a logo.png file directly in that same root folder. And just to make things look a bit prettier, we've got a title of our app, and now we're just going to basically create a little logo. And now we're using a link. These are tags. I'm going to go through this right now. with you, so don't be worried. I'm going to go through these tags itself. PNG, and the type is it's image or GIF, right? Oops, did I? Image or GIF, and close it. Okay, now we can save that. We go back to the web page of our app, and okay, now you can see over here, instead of it having a generic item like this with the world page, we actually have a bit of a logo, and we have a bit of the app name itself. Doesn't have any content, doesn't have anything nice. But now let's just go through this itself. When you look at this, this is the structure of an HTML document. These tags are telling it what to do because there's predetermined language around this. So this says, this is the HTML start and this is where HTML ends. So when you read between that point and that point, all of the content there will be HTML based. This will be the header of the page, which gives us some content like the title of the web page and a little icon that is given there and any links that we create. And the body is where all the content is that we're going to put in from that. And in the body itself, we're going to create all of these divisions and the like. Now, I don't want you to be worried about the content and the complexity of the language. You're not going to learn the language in this session. What are you going to do is we're going to create a very, very rudimentary app using the language, but I've given you the link to W3 Schools, and that's where you go through the language to understand all the content in that. But how you go through this is I don't recommend you try to actually learn everything around HTML and then do this. I recommend that you understand the rudimentary items, try to start building things and go to how-to pages. How would I do this? How would I do this? And then expand on your language. Because you got to see this almost like English, like a language you're trying to learn. No one goes through the language and actually reads everything in the dictionary and hopes they can actually now create grammatically correct sentences. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to say, look, let me get a bit of root, let me build up my grammar, let me do things, and that's how I get better and better at actually building content. So now we've got this rudimentary page, and now we want to put some things in it. And this is how you build a web page. The first thing is you've got to realize on the front end, if I'm just going to write the content now, how I think it should look, not draw it, but just write the content. And you'll see that just by writing it down, it's not very, very ugly. So let's start. I'm going to create this, basically this a division. So now I'm basically saying this is an item that I'm going to structure and design later on. I'm giving it an ID so I can identify it later on when I start styling it and making it look pretty. And that's what CSS is there for. CSS is to say, okay, look, we want this whole thing to look pretty. And that's what we're going to do with CSS because just HTML makes it look ugly. Let's call this, say my name app. Let's call it that. Okay, now we basically want our first name and surname and let the app click on a button and it'll say your name is so-and-so. So then we create a form now. And again, we give it an ID because if we want to manipulate or do anything on the form and styling, we basically need it. Remember, you can call it anything. Just remember, HTML, CSS is case sensitive. So if you make this an uppercase, it's got to always be referenced as an uppercase. Lowercase, always referenced as a lowercase. So we're giving it that ID, and now we need to give it content.
Yeah, Shane, can I disturb you?
Yeah.
We can't see the page you're working on. We can only see.
Sorry. Okay. Let me get back there. Let me change the share. Stop this share. Let me share. Apologies for that. Can you see it now? Okay, so now we're in the Visual Studio look. This was the structure I was talking about. Everything here related to the content. This is telling us, sorry, this is HTML from here, and this is how we close the tag. This is where we start the header, close the header, start the body, close the body. So the body is what's going to be on the page. The header is what's going to be on the tab of of the item itself. So here I've created a division, and this is what's going to say in it. I've created a form. Now we've closed the form as well, but now we're going to put content in the form itself. Hello? Sorry, someone talking?
He's as a basis of he's the CEO of Standard Bank South Africa, Yashid Obed, and see how important that they use in HTML.
Hello, someone talking? Hello? Okay, I guess it's gone off now. Okay, so now what I've done is I'm creating a form. So I don't have to create each item here itself. Basically, when you create the form, it allows you to create a label because we know everything. I need a label and I need an input box. So I'm saying, okay, input type is equal to text because I want someone to type text. And in the text, basically, I'm going to give it a name as well, an ID, because I might have to reference it to make it stylish. And we'll see what I mean when I say all of this. And I'll give it name. This basically is equal to fname. And this allows me to reference these items. And now I've closed this input, but I also want 2 line breaks, right? Basically, this just allows me to create 2 line breaks. And now I'll create another one. Instead of me retyping this each time, I'm just going to copy this again, paste it there again. Now I'll call this maybe last name. And here, basically, it's text. Our ID will be, sorry, let's make this one, this is F name, L name, right? Now I'll also put 2 breaks there, that's good. And then finally, I want to actually, put a button that's going to actually allow the user to click enter so something can happen. And the type will be button ID, whoops. ID is equal to, let's give it, do I need an ID? No, I don't. For this, now I need to say what happens when I click on click. So let's do nothing for it now, but value. So what is it going to actually say on the button? And it's going to say my name. Okay. Okay, and I need to close this. Okay, that basically should have something. Let me just see that everything works now. Okay, lovely. Now what happens is I'm going to go here. Let me stop sharing, share my other screen. And this is what it looks like. Not very pretty. It's not doing anything. And when I click on the button, like I said, it won't do anything because why? We haven't created backend server code. And as you can see that the HTML has got all the content that we want, but it looks really, really ugly. And if you publish an app like this, no one will probably want you to use it. Okay, now let's go back to the code. Okay. Now on this side, I also need the results of my item to come out. So when I click share my name, I want it to be, I want the output to actually come in. Let's just call this output. And I'll close this and I'll leave it blank so that I constantly save every little bit I do. Okay, so this gives us, it'll be exactly the same, looking very, very ugly. And that basically says our form is incomplete because it has no styling and has no fundamental code. What I'm going to do here though, is I'm going to say, okay, what happens when you click the actual button? I'm going to give it a my function. This you can call anything, my function, my app, whatever you want to call it. And it's obviously going to do nothing because why? I don't have any script or coding to do that. So instead of me creating a server-side engine, I'm just going to go here. And what you do is on your HTML page, you can tell it script. And what this tells it, it says inside this is actually JavaScript. And what we're doing is now we've got a function that we can build inside here. Whoops, a function. Let me just see. Yeah. Okay, function. Where does it look? Does it give me? Okay, function, but we called it my function. Okay, and it will start and end. Right. So now we've got a function, my function, just to make sure that when it calls my function on a click event, it's got something to do, but we're not telling it to do anything yet. So let's tell it to do something, because we're building everything. It doesn't have to look pretty yet, but we just need to actually work. So I'm just going to give, oops, I'll give it a variable, any variable. And in this, I need to equate it to now document, because this is JavaScript saying the document that you're working on gets the element, because it's an element by ID. What is the ID? Fundamentally, it's first name and it's F name. Where's our ID? Sorry, F name and L name. There's our two IDs that we created for these two elements of text. Okay, so let's get this element by ID, and let's call it F name. Whoops, F name, and let's get the value of this item. Okay, that's great, but now we need to add space to it because that's our first name. Let's do this. Let's just copy and paste. And Control V. Ooh, forgot to click a plus there. Okay, so now we say, give me my first name, give me a space, and give me my last name. So it finds those two, hopefully. Ooh, that's an equal to, should be a plus. And that's the advantage. The underlying, the funny squiggly lines are constantly telling me that I've got an error on the page. Okay. And I put a semicolon to close that. That's what JavaScript requires. And then I need to actually assign this to my output. Document.getElement by ID. Whoops. By ID, this ID was output. As we can see, we named this one ID because output, we're going to put it there in that little box. Dot inner HTML. I basically want its HTML value to be equal to, and let's just say hi, comma, my, or your name. Your name is, and with a, let's put a space, close that, delete. Your name is, and let's put a plus, and we use that variable that we created, LNM, and that should work great. Now we can save this and basically stop the sharing and then share the app screen. Okay, now refresh the screen itself and I can try putting in my name and click the application. Ooh, and it's not doing something. And this is why we get back into the application and we inspect it. So if you saw what I did there, I clicked the right click and I clicked inspect, which allows me to see what is happening on my HTML page around everything that has happened thus far. And what I do is I can go back into my code. So first thing is shows that, are there any errors? It says there's no issues. So from that perspective, we can stop sharing here. And let me go back into this again. And we're back into this. All the script, the function looks fine. We're calling my function. Everything looks fine there. Ooh, it doesn't look very pretty. Let's see what's happening. Sorry, I'm just admitting some people. Okay, we've got document get element by ID plus that. All of that looks great. And this looks to things where you can actually see where there are issues around your code itself. Specifically here, if the function is not doing anything from a button perspective, either the function's not being called, which is probably what's happening right now, or the version of the software that you are using is not right. Okay, so I'm just updating my version very quickly of my Visual Studio Code, and it's going to just open up my index in HTML, and we're looking at it again. So here, what I'll do is I'll put two things here. Now we can capture this to find out, is there a problem here? And we're going to then call it Windows.alert. This is what I use, is equal to, Windows.alert, sorry, LNM. Okay. Oops, I'll close that. I'm just checking. I'm not sure. Let me just check if we still sharing that page, the screen. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in essence, this allows us to actually now error trap the item that we're looking at, and when we go back to it and refresh it, it's basically would allow us to see if anything's happening. In this case, it's not returning the value. Okay. Sorry, I'm just moving this around. Okay. So we've got a div ID output. I think the problem here is it might actually waiting for styling. So now we're going to start styling this items per se. I'll leave this as value for now. Checking everything looks fine from my side. Oops. Everything looks great. Let's go to the styling. Okay. Now we need to create a new page, a new file, and we'll call this main.css, cascade style sheets. But now we need to reference this main.css. So we need to create a link. And this will basically call it same exactly as above, link. Basically, it's a style sheet. Style sheet. And where do we get it? We created it. It's called main.css. And that's it. And the type. No, we don't even have to tell it the type. Okay. Okay, now we're going to start styling this. And this can actually, I'm just looking at the time. Okay, we've got about 30 minutes. Whew. It's not going to be enough, but let's start. The first thing is we're going to start is the body. And we want the body to look nice. We don't have to do anything. This is a predetermined word, so we don't need to worry about it. And we open the squiggly brackets, close the squiggly brackets, and we want it to display as a flex box. And this allows us to say fundamentally, we can start, this is CSS, and we want it to display as a flex. We want to justify its content center, right? We want to line items as well in the center. So this allows us, justify content is I think vertical, and line items is horizontal. Okay, so center. Next item is we basically want, let's make it a column. So we want everything to go down on the body. Okay, it was that already, but we're doing this for a specific reason so that we can do things around the other items. Border, we want it, the border size. So we're saying if you create a border, one view of min, what this means is I've got horizontal and vertical windows. I'm saying use the minimum size of the two and make it 1% of that. Make it solid and make it, let's just for gray, right? Make it gray, and that should give us something. And let's just use the margin as well, because if we want it to look a bit prettier, 1 viewer height, about 10 viewer width, because we're giving it a margin. So this starts on top, right, bottom, which let's make it 1 viewer height as well. And then completely left, let's make it viewer width again. Oops, viewer width. Okay, At this stage, we've got a bit of a body created, a structure, style sheet. Let's go back. Let me stop sharing. Let's go back to, let me share my app. Okay. Okay, so you should see this again. And let's refresh. And there we go. Now we've got the body and everything is made up by that. And we know now that at least we've got something to work with. Okay. This starts the styling process. Now we've just talked about the body. We've got to do a whole lot more. Okay, back to this. Now the next item we want to style is, okay, let's get rid of this. Next item we want to style would be, oh, problem there, sorry. Didn't see that. Okay, next item we want to style is the title, hashtag title. That was our application that said, say my name app. I'm going to text, align it, align the text to the center. All right, we want to create a font size, maybe make it 2 of the viewer max, make it big enough so that we can see it. Background color, let's give it a bit of a background color of teal, and let's give it a color actually, so the font color of white. As you can see, it's in American English. And the font weight, which is like, instead of saying bold, we use font weight here, and let's make it 900. Okay, so that's quite bold. Let's save that. Let's basically share that, see what's happening back at the other screen now. So we created something. Okay, come on, let's refresh. Oh, there we go. So now what you notice, that previous error, there was a square bracket which didn't allow you to read my borders. So these left and right borders, now you can see, make sure that I don't go all across that. And here you can see I've got a bit of a nice little name, say my name app. But what I need there is maybe a bit of a top margin and a bottom margin. So let's stop sharing and let's go back there. Okay, so let's just give it a margin, just top and bottom. So that makes it 2 viewer min, 2 viewer min. And remember the syntax that you'd use here, it's all in that W3C schools, and it gives you examples, it gives you ways in which to actually try it out and the like. So all of these tags and these properties you're going to find in CSS, W3C schools under CSS. Everything under here, you're going to find under HTML. So that basically gives us more. Let's go to the next item, the labels. Okay, so now I'm going to go a bit faster because we've only got 8 minutes left. Let's go to label and let's use display. Again, we're going to create a flex box, right? Because we want to actually start just, basically moving things around, aligning items. Whoops, align item center. Justify content. Let's move this. Justify content center. Let's just then make the width 100%. 100%, so we're saying use all the width of that area. Let's make the font size same as the other one, 2 view min. Okay, let's actually then create padding. So this is padding between the border and the text. So we don't make it actually on top of each other when you create borders. So let's make it about 1.2 view min, and about 2.20 view min. Okay, that looks okay. Why is it giving me 2.0 view min? Ah, that's lower. Okay. Okay. And let's give it a margin of 0 because we've already described padding and the like. I'm going to the next one, which is the actual inputs that we type. Okay, so input, oops. These are the inputs that we created. And now we're saying, okay, type. You remember we had different types. So now let's actually use the first type, which is, we've done, oh, we have to do text first. Let's do the text. We've done a type text now. And let's close that. And now we're using a select. Okay, so now we need to put content in there. The width is, again, said 100%. We only use all of that width if you've got, so we can't change names. Our font size, we said 2 VMAX. What's wrong with the font size? This is why syntax is very important, and a tool like this helps you pick up content. Padding, again, let's just copy this padding. I think that's good enough for us. It's very similar. Want a 0 margin, okay. And create the borders. So in this case, the one was actually a label. So here we're actually putting a label, first name. Now we're saying where you put in your text, we want a bit of a border. So actually, let's make it a display. Here, inline block is fine. Let's actually then create the border itself. Border, one view min, solid, solid. Want it, let's call it gray again. Okay, then we want the border radius because we want, this says, okay, do we want it curved or stretched? So in this case, let's use border radius. And we make it 0.5 vmin. So this means on the outer edges of the border, we'll have a slight curve. And then we'll say cursor, when you're going through that, there'll be a type of cursor we want, which is pointer. Okay, lovely. Okay, so let me stop sharing for a moment. Let's go and actually see what has happened to the applications thus far. Okay, so let's refresh it. Okay, so now we've got a bit of space we created on that side. We created a first name, last name as a label. We created a space. There's the pointer. When you click on this, it basically goes in and creates a border around it. And that allows us to say, okay, I can type the name. Font size is good. Font size is good. Lovely. Okay, so we've formatted, created a design around this item using CSS style sheets. Let's continue. Okay, now let's say, okay, on the button. So we've done the text. Now we've forgotten the button. Remember input, type is equal to button, close that, comma. Don't need to select. We can just start. Okay, width, 100% again. We want background color. Let's make it green because we want it pretty. So this is pretty fine what everything looks like. Color, so the text color, we want it as white because it's got to stand out against that. Padding between the text and the border, we want it to be basically, let's make 1.4 view max. And let's make it 2 VMAX, okay? That looks okay. Then our border, we'll take basically none because we basically have a button, so we don't need a border around that. And that should basically be fine. Let's also create a cursor. Pointer, okay. That gives us a button a bit. And let's create a bit of, I think, something nice around it. So on the input, on the button, let's say when you hover over the button, it must do something. So you're not pressing something, but you just hover and we'll do something there. Okay, let's make it background color. Color, let's just say it basically becomes tomato. Okay, it gives us something. So when you hover it, it will change, but the front color will be exactly the same. And on the last thing is on the actual output, hashtag output. And let's make it, because we added it as an ID, let's give it a font size, a bit bigger than the others, 2.5 Vmax and 2.5 Vmax. And let's just give it a bit of, I think, width, give it about 80%. Okay. And now we can stop sharing to see anything happening on the app that looks better. Oops, let's refresh that. There we go. Okay, now this starts looking much better and we can start typing our name, put in the surname, and we can click say our name, but we don't have a height. Let's just go back there to stop sharing. And let's just change this to a display of flex. And we will, I think we're almost out of time. And let's make this height 10 view height. Okay, great. 10%. And now, great. Okay, now let me stop sharing. I'll share the screen. Okay, so what we did now is delete. Say my name app is done. We've given the label, we've given it tonight. You can see the point is changing. And when I hover over this button, there we go, it changes to tomato. And now when I click this, it should be actually doing something, but it's not because we don't have the JavaScript debugged. Let's go back here. Unfortunately, it's already 5 o'clock. I think we're at the end of this item. I'm not sure, should I actually then send the rest of this content to Tobiso? For those that are interested in actually seeing how the button would work with the function included as well. Is everyone fine with that? Important is that, you know, I've run through a bit of tags, languages around two main forms, which is index and HTML. And very, very, very critical is to say, number one, when you're creating, let me share another screen, which is here we go. So when we created the folder, we went onto the web app, we created any folder, doesn't matter where it is. Wherever we created the folder, all our content, as you can see, is on the root directory. Oops. You can't put things anywhere. You can't put it all over the place, but you can put in relation to this. You could actually create a new folder here in subfolders and then reference it accordingly, but everything has to be in this web app folder where you put this. Obviously, it doesn't have to be named web app. It can be anything. Your main page is called index.html. You cannot name it anything else. And as you can see, the CSS file, you can name it whatever you want to, just as long as you link it to the right name. And your logo PNG, the image that you created, we put it here. And typically, we would take all of this information and we'd publish it on our web server, which is hosted by someone. It'll be a public HTML file, and you just put it on there. You've got your domain, which is your, www.google.com, and it'll actually open up these pages, for example. And in this case, if you're, for example, it's Say My Name app. So let's say your company is called Say My Name. We'd register a domain called www.saymyname.co.za. And what we do from that point onwards is we actually create that link, publish this in the public folder, and everyone that has access rights to this will actually have this. Typically, what you do is normally, if you've got a web app, this would start off with your login. Your login page would be your index page. And, or you'd have a nice landing page with a little login bar, which will log in and then allow you to tag in into that and navigate from this. There are many, many different aspects to this. How do you access different web pages? You want 10 different web pages because your application will have 10 different pages. All of that will be part of the design, and much, much more. So this is just, like I said, very, very rudimentary, very, very basic for you to start understanding the concept of web app development. And the idea is you can publish all of this logic. The server side is running all of the heavy loading and lifting, which means on your phones or tablets and the like, or computers, they're just accessing the information that's been published to and fro. And typically when you publish information, if I publish loads and loads of complex algorithms and stuff like this here, and you're asking me to load it, it makes my website slower. That's why we try to process and make things happen much more on the back end, and all you get is the output of the data. Okay, I hope that was very informative for you. And fundamentally, I'll get some feedback from Tabisa and the like, just on whether we should actually continue with a different one around the JavaScript, just to complete a bit of scripting to show what happens when you need something to happen when you click the button. And this should be done on the server side. I normally code it on the server side, but we don't. For the purposes of this, a lot of you won't have server-side emulators. And I don't want you to only think about PHP. So in this case, with your own browsers, they normally run JavaScript quite effectively. So you can use JavaScript because they interpret and compile around JavaScript as well. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy what's left of your evening. Okay, I shall stop sharing and stop recording.